Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, episode 65. In this for the long haul, and we are chatting about some methods you can use if you find yourself out in the bush and you misplaced your compass. Maybe you lost it, maybe you had a boating rollover, something like that. Your compass has disappeared, and you need some sort of method to get a bearing or a direction so you can start making your way out, or at least get an idea of where you are and where you're pointed. That kind of makes sense, Ben? Did that come out right?
Yeah, I guess just talking about alternative methods to navigate out. I mean, we're all for taking your GPS or your compass, and we believe that that's common sense to have those type of things. So I'm okay there.
Yeah, no, I thought I had something on my face. I'm not gonna lie. It's like, what the heck is that?
Getting nervous.
No,
My
we're
beard
good.
going.
We're good.
So we were just talking, and we kind of started this last week, but we talked about some different things and different tools that you can take and use. And like we were even joking today about other things that you hear people talking about that maybe aren't so reliable.
Yeah, and there, and I know what you're getting at here. And why don't we dispel that myth right from the get go? Because I hear it a lot. And actually, as you and I were talking about it, I was sitting on hold at work, and somebody came in. I was chatting to them at the same time, and they were asking what I was doing. It's kind of a slower work right now, just due to the COVID and stuff like that, because everything's kind of slowed down for my industry. Uh,
Yeah.
or I should say, it's status quo. There's no surprises lately, so I have a little bit of downtime. Anyway, I was talking to this person, and they're like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And I was just saying, well, I was talking to Ben, the fellow I do the podcast with, about alternate ways of finding your way in the woods if you don't have a compass. First thing they said, well, you go by the moss. And I just went, actually, that's what we were just talking about. And that's probably not the most accurate way to try and find a direction in the woods, because there's a lot of factors that come into play with what side moss grows on a tree. There is some generality to it, and that's where this conception kind of created itself, but it's not really accurate.
No. So what I found is that yes, in slightly darker, shadier areas, moss might grow a little bit thicker, fuller, more completely. And I guess the theory is that the north side of the tree gets the least amount of sun, so it may get a little bit more shade, therefore a bit more moss. That being said, there's a million factors, like you said, that can affect this, and it could very well not be the most north side of the tree. So taking a look at where the moss grows and saying, "Oh, I know north, south," no, you probably don't accurately know it.
I wouldn't
So
rely on that method at all. I mean, you may find 5 out of 10 times it's somewhat accurate, and that's great. But what happens if it's the other 50% of the time? You know what I mean? If you're relying on this, and it's
yeah,
only accurate at best 50% of the time, and I'm pulling numbers out of my head, it's not really a viable method. Because, I mean, just like Ben said, what if it's running beside a river and the river happens to be on the north side and the sun reflects off the river and gives that side of the tree more sunlight, so it's not as full? And that's like, there's a ton of factors that could work into this. You know what I mean? And in a situation where you're just kind of quickly trying to get yourself a direction, you may not take all these factors into it. So it's a method that you hear a lot, and it's a method that I would not reliably tell anybody to use for any rhyme or reason, especially when there actually is some legit ways you can do it that are pretty accurate. And we talked about a few of them before we had the show here, and I'm trying to think of the one you were talking about there, Ben. What was the one you were talking about prior to that? Because I brought up the
the
stick
watch.
method. There
Huh?
was the watch. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but there are some reliable ways, depending on what you have with you, some of which requires nothing on your persons to be able to work, and some of it requires basic things like a wristwatch with a minute hand, or
Yeah.
the best case, which everybody knows, and we might as well tackle this one because it's probably the next most popular method, is the old magnetizing a needle trick.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure that's something you must have done in Boy Scouts or any kind of those scouting things. Like, it
Oh,
was
I
one
never
of.
got to do anything
Oh,
like
okay.
that.
When I was in Beavers, if you can remember how long ago the Beavers were a thing, it was one of the first things they did. We were like, oh, let's make a compass. And you take a needle and you rub it on a magnet, you put it on a leaf, or anything really to balance it on the water. If you're really careful, you can actually balance it on the surface tension of the water, but I found that didn't work as well.
Yeah,
Because it has the drag. For whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to work as well. But anyway, you balance it on a leaf or something like that in the water, and it will point. Or it'll give you your north and south bearing. However, what most people fail to realize is, do you know which end points to which direction? And there's ways you can do that based on the magnet you're using, if you know the north and south polarity of the magnet, and the way you stroke the needle on said polarity of the magnet. So there's a couple things you have to take into account there. But even if you don't know your north and south direction, at least you still have a direction, a constant direction you can use for traveling. You know what I mean? You always know that you're at least pointing in this direction and going in a straight line. So, at bare minimum, that's what that method is going to give you. If you don't know the polarity of the magnet you're using, you can at least get a constant direction. You may not know what that direction is. It could be north, it could be south, but at least you're still going in a constant straight line. And ultimately, if you got nothing and you're trying to get yourself out of a situation, that's better than guessing.
well, and it's not like you're down to a 50-50 chance. I mean, you're going to generally have a few clues when you look around of what is more likely to be north than south. But this gives you a pretty accurate as magnetic gets, because we also know that magnetic north and true north are two totally different things
Yeah.
presently. They actually say that magnetic north has been moving north rather rapidly, and is fast approaching true north in relative to the last few hundred years. Did you
I
know
believe
that?
I seen something about that on. I just Googled it, of course, and sorry, that little thing we were talking about just popped up on the side of my screen. So we're going to ignore it and keep on going. Uh, I do remember reading something about that on Google when I was setting the declination on my compass this year. That I was watching like it tracks every year where
Yeah.
magnetic north is in representation of true north, and it is exponentially gaining closer to than it has in the last few years.
Yes. Yeah. They actually think that it's going to maybe even surpass and go like to the Russian side in the foreseeable future. Um, and I think on a previous podcast, we actually brought this up. We brought the page up showing where it is and a projection of where it was going. Um, but yeah, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, when we know that, like, if you're in the northern hemisphere, generally the sun is slightly to the south of us. So if you're looking at shadows, you can see that they'll generally arc towards a more northern side. So if you have a way to sort of get a north-south look, looking at shadows, especially as you approach noon, it's much more clear where the north would be. Um, Also, if you know where the sun is setting or rising, then you have your east and west figured out pretty accurately. Um, so that's a good clue. And at night, you can use the stars. So if you have anything that can give you a general trend, you have a pretty good idea of what true, which way is actually north versus south.
Yeah, and you mentioned another good one that's actually very relatively accurate for us here in the northern hemisphere. Is using the stars, and most people know about the North Star or Polaris. Um, and unfortunately, I know there's a trick using the dippers to pick it out. I don't know what that is, but I can pick out the North Star, so I'm not the best one to talk about this. But do you know the trick? It's like two of the stars on one side of the Big Dipper point towards the North Star, and then the
I
two.
think the handle. I think I've always used the handle. If you look at the handle, and I know the one when I see it, I don't know if it's the big or small dipper anymore. But when you look at it, I mean, it's quite obvious when you've seen it a few times. But you can line that up, and then if you look down that line, you're looking it up now, aren't you?
Yep. Well, I figure we might as well give accurate information. So what does it say? You can use the Big Dipper to find Polaris, which is also the North Star. Uh, a line from the two outermost stars in the bowl of the Big Dipper points towards Polaris.
Okay.
So there you go. Then Polaris marks the tip of the handle of the Little Dipper in the northern sky. So that's another, and I knew it had something to do with the dippers. But once you actually see the North Star a handful of times, it's actually really easy to pick out of the night sky. Would you not agree?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, it's a very bright star comparatively to everything else. I think they say it's the brightest star in the northern sky, and
That
I
should
could be
probably
wrong
be
with
on your
that. I don't
page
know.
up.
But anyway, once you get on to finding the North Star, and I do recommend if you're any kind of outdoorsy, woodsy person that may be going out, have somebody you know that knows where the North Star is point it out to you. And then just over the next couple nights before you go into the woods, just find it and reliably use your compass. And like I said, after it only takes 4 or 5 nights and you can find it like just one after another. It's very simple to find.
There's also a really neat app. I know this is getting away from the reliable non-tech methods, but I think Google has the night sky
Oh, Star Map.
star
Yes.
map.
Google Star Map is excellent. It will show you all the constellations as well. So you'll be able to see the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, and in relative location to the North Star, so that you can pick out those constellations a little easier. Because depending on the time of year, you may not have the best view of one of the dippers. And once
Yeah.
again, I am not an astrologist in any way, shape, or form, but I do know with the tilt of the Earth, you get to see one a little better than the other depending on time of year and stuff like that. But yeah, so
So,
North Star is actually a very accurate way of finding north.
so that is a very fun tool to learn about the stars and stuff. And you can put it up, and it'll actually show you the constellations and stuff, and give you some explanation of what's going on. And you can really play with those things, and that's a good way to learn them. And if you don't stay on top of it, it's easy to forget and kind of you get to the ones you can quickly find and remember. But I don't remember all the ones I'd like to remember. That's for sure. So that's a good method. Yeah, there's that method. We were going to talk a bit about the watch one, and that's a pretty simple one. I actually printed off the sheet here for it, and you mentioned, and I think I read it later too, that you can use shadows and a watch to get it even more accurate.
Yes.
Yeah,
You can use shadows on its own as well to get a less accurate version, but once
yeah,
again, it gives you a general direction. And I'm going to try this off the top of my head, and you tell me if I'm along the right
yeah.
lines with the watch method.
I have it right here.
I know, that's why I'm going to try this off the top of my head. If I am not mistaken, in the northern hemisphere, you need a watch with a minute and hour hand. Second hand's not so important, but if you have a minute hand and an hour hand, you take, actually just an hour hand,
Just that.
uh, take and point your hour hand at the sun. Lay your watch horizontal, of course, first. Don't hold it, vertically. That's not going to help you much. Lay it horizontally. Take your hour hand and point at the sun, and then it's the bisect between the hour hand and 12 o'clock gives you south.
Yes.
Ha
Now,
ha!
now, daylight savings times throws that off, and then it's not 12 o'clock, but 1 o'clock or 1300 hours
Mm.
in the afternoon.
And that's in the fall. That's when we actually go on daylight savings time. In the spring, we're not actually on daylight savings time, right?
That's right.
Spring
Yes.
ahead, we actually catch up to normal time. Fall back is when we actually do the offset to try and get more daylight hours or something crazy like that.
So I'll read this out.
Yeah.
Northern hemisphere, the hour hand is pointed to the sun. A south line can be found midway between the hour hand and the 1200 hours standard time. On daylight savings time, the north-south line is between the hour hand and the 1300 hours. If there's any doubt as which end of the line is north, remember that the sun is on the east before noon and west afternoon. So that kind of helps too. Like with you having a watch, you should know now approximately where the sun is kind of sitting. And this alignment method helps you. And like you were telling me, it's really sometimes hard to line the hour hand up with the sun. So putting a stick in and lining it along the shadow.
Yeah,
So
we'll give you another. So the shadow method, and this is my go-to method, as I was explaining to you. If you don't, you can use it in conjunction with a watch, which gives you a very accurate direction to go on, or you can use it on its own. If you were, for some reason, uprooted and thrown in the woods stark naked, and all you had was what you had around you, you can get a general direction with this in the northern hemisphere. And I always recommend this one anytime I'm teaching any kind of quote unquote survival class, but I don't call it a survival class. I call it living in the woods class. When I used to work with DNR and stuff like that, I threw a few of them on. But anyway, for whatever reason you find yourself, you have nothing, and you're in the woods, what you do, and this does require it to be a somewhat sunny day, you have to at least cast shadows on the ground. Take a stick, drive the stick in the ground. Now, at the end of the shadow that stick is casting, drop a stone. Surely you can find it doesn't have to be a stone. It can be any kind of marker that you want. And that's going to be point A. Wait roughly 20 to 30 minutes. And it can be less, but a little longer is better than a little less because it's going to give you more of a declination on this. So wait about 20 to 30 minutes. And if you don't have a watch, you're guessing it, right? So wait a
yeah,
while. And the
couple
reason
cigarettes,
What's that?
couple cigarettes.
Yeah. So
You're
the
smoking.
reason I recommend this is because in a quote unquote survival situation, panic can kill you. This gives you something to do immediately that's going to make you sit down and think. And that's the key, is to sit down, calm down, assess your situation, and figure stuff out, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
this is a great idea or a great time to do that. Drive your stick in the ground, put your first marker in, and now just sit and think about what's going on. Like, what do you have around you? What do you have available to you? It's just a good time to reassess and collect your thoughts. Now, anyway, wait your 20 to 30 minutes. Now, the end of the shadow will have moved, right? Because the sun, of course, drifts across the sky and it's going to change the direction of the shadow that's cast on the ground. So you're going to drop a second marker, be it a stone, pine cone, whatever you have around you, at the tip of the shadow where it lies now. And then take a line, or your stick, you can now pull it out of the ground, and lay it between your 2 points. You now have your general eastern and western direction. So starting at the first point and traveling to the second point in the northern hemisphere should give you a general idea of your western direction. And then from there you should be able to you have your east, you have your west, you should be able to kind of figure out your north and south and at least get an idea of where you go. The downside of this method, unfortunately, is every time you want to check the direction you're traveling, it's going to take you 20 minutes. But you can do it with absolutely nothing except what you find in the woods. So, in an emergency situation, you can use this. And I have used this in the woods, not relying on it solely, but testing this method. And it's a general direction. And it's generally constant. And I do mean general, because it's not going to be pinpoint accuracy. There's a lot of factors that come into this, as well as anything, a lot of other things, right? It's not going to be as accurate as using a magnet or a compass, but it gives you a good general guideline. And I tried this when I was, once again, referring to the PGIs. Every time I would stop at a PGI, I had some time to kill, I would set up one of these. I only waited 5 to 10 minutes. So it was, once again, a little less accurate, but it did give me a general, like, it was wobbly, but I went in a general direction for the entire 2 kilometers. So that's, like I said, that's the one I like to tell everybody because it requires nothing.
yeah.
And it forces you to sit down and assess your situation. Which, in the woods, in an emergency situation, once again, panic can kill you. And it tries to get you to calm down, gives you something to occupy your mind, and makes you assess what's going on around you while you're trying to complete a task. Because, once again, I'm going to throw this word out there a lot, and you hear me beating it like a dead horse. In an emergency situation, because these are not methods you should be using in a non-emergency situation. They make compasses for a reason, right? So in an emergency situation, if you can prioritize what you're doing and keep yourself occupied, it'll go a long way to keeping you calm and keep you from panicking, have better resource management, better time management. It just keeps you kind of in a module sense, where you just complete a task to move on to task B, to move on to task C, to move on to task D. and it just gives you that step-by-step process to keep you focused and keep you moving down in a nice, safe manner. Or at least
Yeah.
that's what I always told myself, and it seems to work.
Well, and this kind of brings you to the next thing that I've used a lot more than like a direction finding thing is sometimes the best thing you can do is just stop and be really quiet. Maybe you can close your eyes and listen. And it's amazing what you'll learn just by sitting there and listening. Because when you're panicking, you miss so much of what's going on around you. And some of these things are the sound of a river, the sound of machinery, cars, heavy equipment, boats, all make an incredible amount of noise. And when you're lost and you're panicking, you're not thinking about these things, that's just lost in the roar. But if you're listening for it, it'll oftentimes give you a really good idea of the closest thing to you, something that kind of is a way out, to a road or a river or the shoreline. There's something to get you to. So even though you don't necessarily know that direction is north, south, east, or west, once you have something to sort of guide you by listening, then you have something to work on. If you can kind of, because humans have actually really good ability to tell which direction sound comes from.
Mm. I remember you
In
telling
fact,
me that before, too.
yeah. So with this ability, if you can kind of pinpoint that I think I hear something in that direction and use methods, the same methods you'd use if you had a compass, choose an object as far away as possible that you can pick out on the horizon and keep walking to that object, a good chance is you'll get to what you hear before you get to what you've seen, if that makes sense.
No, that makes actual perfect sense. And you actually made a point that I forgot to bring up, which is really good to talk about in this segment. And that's how do you travel in the direction once you found it? And you picked it out right there. You pick a landmark as far away in that direction as you can figure out, and a landmark that you think you should be able to constantly see while you're traveling in said direction, and you just travel to that landmark. So it might be the tallest tree off in the distance that should be easily to see, or a slightly different tree, or perhaps a mountain, or something very key that you should be able to identify readily traveling in that direction. You just keep traveling towards it. That way you're not walking 10 feet trying to check your direction, walking 10 feet trying to check your direction. Even with a compass, you don't do that because that's going to make you stagger a lot when you try and do that. But if you pick something far off in the distance and you just travel towards it, you'll get a nice straighter line, I should say.
Yeah, yeah, and with that method, even if you end up veering off to one side or the other, you usually bring yourself back in. Where with the compass, if you veer off from, say, like trying to get around a tree or a log or a lake or some kind of physical object, then it's really hard to get back on alignment unless, and I've seen this method too, where you align yourself between two things. And if you have two people, that's easier to do. It's time consuming, but say you had to go around a pond, you want it to hold that same line. You might pick a tree on the other side of that line. You get your buddy to stay where you are. You walk all the way around the lake. And then when you're in that line again, you get him to tell you, and then you stop. Now you wait there, your buddy catches up to you, and then you continue on your path. And that is the method to get around something if you're trying to walk a bearing. And
Yeah, because offsetting, individual offsetting is kind of I don't know, it's an art all of its own. Like, there's people that are really good at offsetting themselves when walking a bearing, and there are people more commonly that think they know how to offset and they end up just botching it. And I mean, I'm not even ashamed to say I'm almost closer to the latter. I know the principle behind offsetting and stuff like that, but the reality is it's something I don't use enough and don't practice enough. That I am actually a little ashamed to say that I'm not that great at it. I'm probably better than the average Joe, but I'm not good as in, yeah, I can hold a constant bearing over great distances when I have to offset. But now people I've worked with, they can offset almost like a kilometer and come back and still be on a relatively straight bearing.
yeah, so that comes back to, and this is something you do. You don't need tools to do this. is pacing. Um, and that's a very simple system, and it's very important for navigation and figuring out things, is knowing your pace. And most people have a pretty regular pace. So if you go out and walk 200 meters, measure off 200 meters, walk it, remember the number of times your left foot hit the ground or whatever, and then if you keep doing that, you'll see that you're pretty consistent. So you know that 200 meters is X number of steps, or 100 meters is 67 steps, or whatever it happens to be. And it's good to keep yourself onto what that is. But once you have that figured out, you can use that pretty consistently to mark off your distances. So if you're going along a line and you come across an insurmountable object, you have to go around it. What I've always been taught to do is you choose a 90-degree thing. So if you were going, say, straight north, all of a sudden you're going to now go east. You go, say, 100 yards over, so your that number of paces over. Then put your original bearing of north on again, go north, and then you can go back west. And that should put you very close, if not exactly on, your original bearing.
Yep, and that's basically the textbook way of doing offset. But it all comes down to, like you said, knowing your pace and stuff like that. So I don't want to say I'm lucky, but I have the gracing of my pace is almost exactly 1 meter. Like, it's just my leg width works out to. I'm just shy of 1 meter, actually, or just over 1 meter. I can't remember. I'd have to check. But I'm just one or the other over, which works out really great for me. Being short has its advantage. But if you ever want to know what your pace is, literally, don't just try and do one step. That's the worst thing you can do, because that's going to change every time. Pick a distance, a set distance. So take out a long meter line or something like that, and pace off like 100 yards. And walk that down and walk that back 3 or 4 times and see what your average amount of regular paces is to cover said distance. And then take your average and divide it in, and that'll give you your average pace. If you don't have the luxury of having something like that, you can cheat and go to a Walmart parking lot. Parking spaces are exactly 3 meters.
I disagree.
They're supposed to be exactly 3 meters by TIR standards when they're putting them in.
So you go down to Dartmouth Crossing right now, and you park my old Chevy in some of those parking spots, and I can't open doors. You go to the Costco one, and I can blow lumber in the side.
I was going to say, Costco happens to be a little of the different norm. That's why I said Walmart parking lots. A large parking area, generally they'll make them at 3 meters individually. So like Dartmouth Crossing, I don't know, because that's like that little strip mall-y thing. But I'm thinking if you go to like Micmac Mall, for instance, they should be 3 meters. Any college parking lots should be about 3 meters. Like large parking areas should be 3 meters. Don't take this as gospel. I'm just saying it's supposed to be. And this was told to me by an engineer.
Light poles are pretty consistent. I can't remember what the distance is, but
50 meters?
if you're on like a power line, power lines, their towers or whatever are pretty consistent. So if you can measure one of those off, you can use that as a good. But you mentioned something. But parking lots, roads, open trails are a very easy walk. If you're in deep woods, that's a totally different thing. So here's another fun one to do, and you do it with your GPS. That's the easiest way, honestly, to do it. Take your GPS if you have one, mark off a tree, start walking until you have the distance you want to use, whether it's 100 meters or 400 meters or whatever you're comfortable doing. And you mark your second one. And then just do that same thing in different terrains. Do it in a field. Do it in a parking lot. Do it in deep woods. And then you're going to get a really good idea what you consistently do and how it changes by environments. You know, if you're in heavy woods, your steps are probably generally a little bit shorter. If you're in a field, you can get away with a little bit longer, and so on and so forth. That being said, like myself, I have relatively long legs, and I tend to step over objects. So sometimes even in deep woods, my steps seem to be a little longer than they are out of the woods. But that I really have to keep in mind how I've been doing things, because sometimes I decide to do a lot of little steps just because it's easier. So
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is definitely take your pacing in and out of ideal environments. Now, I did have a comment come up here, Ben, and I don't know what this actually means, so I'm going to say it out, and hopefully they're listening to us, and this isn't just somebody giving us. Nope, leave that on. Thank you. It's B&B has wrote in, hello everyone. Actually, I want to ask you, do you have any suggestions to avoid the taxes? I don't know if that's a typo or something I'm misunderstanding, but B&B, if you are indeed listening, can you maybe give a little more clarification to the question, and we might be able to give you a little insight on answers. But if it's like government taxes, the only thing that's certain in life is death and taxes. There ain't no way to avoid them legally.
we, we're not going to tell you how to cheat the law.
No, in my industry, that would be bad.
But if you want to go camping with us, I don't know what I will tell you.
But yeah, so while we wait for B&B to hopefully give us a little insight into the question there, uh, yeah, those are some important things that you have to realize before you do any kind of navigation in the woods. Is you have to be aware of your own personal tools, being your pace. Um, do you understand how a compass works? If you do have a compass, a lot of people you can hand them a compass, and they really don't know how to use it. They can tell you, oh yeah, like N points to north, which is good. Don't get me wrong. That's a basic understanding of a compass. But there's a lot more to it. Okay, so now you have north. Do you know how to travel north in a long distance? Do you know how to maybe do a north by northwest? Like, there's a lot to it. It's actually worth taking a bit of time, taking a compass, and just teaching yourself a little bit about it. Or better yet, like ground search and rescue and stuff like that, they have a lot of courses that deal with compass and navigating. So join an organization like that that might get you a lot of more in-depth knowledge, and you're serving your community.
Yeah, so we do probably 2, 3 times a year. We do a map and compass course, and it's really good because it gets the maps out. We generally use local maps, and we'll get people to say, okay, you're here at this point on this lake, and there's a tower over here. What bearing is that? So you'll find that bearing. You'll set your whole compass up for that, and then we'll bring you to a location like that, and we'll get you to walk that bearing. And it's really interesting to see if people meet their points, because it's really easy to go off on your bearing
Oh,
if you're not
incredibly easy.
paying attention. And just a few degrees over a few hundred yards starts to make up a dozen yards. Over a kilometer, it can be a few hundred meters or yards. That's a big difference when you're out there, because it means the difference between hitting your point, being able to see your point, and walking clean past it. Especially depending on terrain. If you're in an open field and what you're looking for is a cell phone tower, okay, you're probably going to hit it. But if you're in deep woods and what you're looking for is a well or
Yeah, I was
something
gonna
that's
say,
in
let's say a
ground,
valley, and you're covered
yeah,
in forest.
yeah, you can easily walk past this key landmark, and it could be, say, for search and rescue. Sometimes we know the physical location of a person. We just have to get to them. So we've contacted them by phone. We've been talking to them. They've pinged their cell phone, and they're like, "Yes, I am at coordinate such and such and such and such. Come get me. I've twisted my ankle." Well, if that's in deep woods and you're using your map and compass to get there, it doesn't take a lot to sort of miss them. Now, there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, pay attention, listen. If you got your pacing, you're going to know when you're close to walking past them and you still don't see them. That's the point. Maybe you'll pull out a GPS, because good chance if you're doing this, you'll have that. And you recheck your coordinates. But we don't use our GPSs usually to guide us. We are much more likely to use our compasses because they're, in a short distance, more accurate, especially for bearings.
Yeah, and another important thing is, if you're going to bring a map and compass, not just a compass, make sure you know how to read the map a little bit. That's kind of an art in its own too. You have to know what your scale is, know which direction on the map is north. So you have to understand how a compass rose works. I mean, there's a couple different things to a map as well. Not always does the top of the map point north. Let's just say that. depending on how the map was acquired. If it was printed off Google Maps or something like that, and I've used them, laid a grid over it, and you can. I think there's a feature on Google Earth where you can lay a grid over it and print off a map and get yourself a basic map. Uh, and north's not always up, so you have to know how to find north and then pick a bearing from your compass onto a map and stuff like that. So there's more to that too. And I guess the bottom line is, like we always preach, practice before you need it. You know what I mean? Make sure you understand it at least a little before you have to rely on it.
Yeah, for sure. Get your tools out there, and all these things we're talking about. Like you said, they are backup options. There's something because go back to your needle. You mentioned if you had a magnet, you could magnetize it. But I think you've mentioned before, if you pound on it, you can induce a small magnetic charge to it,
And you can, and you have, and there's a. Technically, if you pound on it, it's just not hammering all over the needle. You have to start at one end and hammer in one direction and repeatedly do that because what you're trying to do um, is literally align the magnetic poles of the ions inside it all in one direction, right? And if you're just hammering it all willy nilly, you're just going to scramble them all up. You might get a slight magnetization to it, but ideally, if you can like strike in a direction, a solid direction, I guess the idea is you can get more of them aligned in one direction. So
yeah.
there's some science behind that, science stuff. So if you're going to rely on that, be sure you have a basic understanding of the science stuff.
I mean, if you have a metal knife, it's easy to check and see if you put a magnetic charge on a needle because you just take the metal knife and you put on one end of the thing. If you pick it up, the needle, you pick the knife up and the needle comes with it. It's charged. It has a magnetic field to it. And like you said, you put it on a leaf or something that's pretty well, virtually frictionless. It might take 6 minutes, especially depending on if there's a breeze or anything around you. But it will tend to align itself with the north-south poles.
And that is an important point. Try to keep as much wind off this as you can so it aligns naturally. And you know what? You don't need that strong of a magnet either to make this work. So I'm sitting over here and I see some rare earth magnets on my nightstand, so that might be a little overkill. But I'm thinking like Willie has these tiny little toys for like it's not an etch a sketch, it's like a magnadoodle. Is that the right thing? And they come with some tiny little magnets in it. If you catch a hold of one of these tiny little magnets, they're virtually unharmful to most electronic devices because they have so little magnetism to them. Throw them in your first aid kit or in your sewing kit, and then your needle and your magnet's all ready together.
Yeah, and a magnet comes in handy a lot of times. If you're in the woods, you can take a magnet, you can put it to a rock, and you can sort of get the indication whether there's an iron content to that rock or something. If you drop something, sometimes that's it has to be metal, obviously, but I don't know how many times I've wanted a magnet in it. I usually have some laying around somewhere.
And generally, I carry a rare earth magnet on the bottom of my kit bag.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just there's a spot there where I can jam it between a pocket and the inside. I just put one rare earth magnet on either side, and it's there and out of the way. I know on the bottom of my bag, generally it's always going to be my sleep setup. So there's nothing in there that should stick to it, minus the zippers or something like that, which are tucked inside the sleeping bag or whatever the case may be.
I've used them in tents and tarps to hold flaps and stuff back.
Oh yeah, magnet has great, vast many uses out in the woods. Don't just pawn it off as something you'll never use. You never know until you try it. And I mean, like Ben said, there's been lots of instances where I've wanted a magnet and wished I had a magnet.
And a lot of flashlights have magnets in them, especially if they're anything to do with like work, because they're designed so you can stick them to your car or to your hood and stuff. So oftentimes, a lot of the kit that you have, you may not really be thinking about it, but there's oftentimes magnets hidden and stuff just to make it useful and helpful in places. So there's a good chance some of your kit has a magnet with it. So
if for some reason, and once again, we're talking survival situation, emergency situation, your cell phone has magnets in it for the speakers. Anything that produces sound will have a magnet in it for a speaker. So if you have a little headphones You can pull the magnets out of the headphones. I mean, it's way better to sacrifice headphones than it is your entire cell phone. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Headphones are relatively inexpensive, and most people bring some sort of entertainment with them if they're in the woods. So I mean,
Even their clothing, some of the buttons and stuff I've seen have it within it. I've seen um, backpacks and stuff with the same thing, where the snaps have a magnet built into it. So there's different places you'll find them. So it's not that you won't necessarily have one, but it's a good thing to have on you. But it's also really good to be aware of where these things are, because if you have a compass and you have a magnet, they should be stored as separate as possible.
yeah, because you can remagnetize your compass not to work properly or change the orientation of the poles in the compass. So
And if you have, for example, something on your wrist that has a magnet in it, and now you're holding a compass with that same hand, and you laugh, I'm sure, but this happens. People have magnetic jewelry. I know that this. There used to be these bands
yep,
the kids and wives had. You could wrap them around your hands and they snap all together. It was all this black like rock stuff, and they were strong. They were relatively strong magnets, and you could set them up in different ways. I'm sure there's one not far from me. Um, but if you have one of those and you hold a compass, that compass is not pointing north.
and it's not
Well,
even just the magnets. Some electronic devices can mess it up. Some watches can mess
yeah,
it up. So keep all wedding rings. Certain wedding rings, if they're made out of gold, for instance, great
like all
conductor. Can't remember if it's magnetic, but I'm thinking silver, silver magnetic. There's a certain type of band that actually has a magnetic charge to it, and I can't remember what it is. I think all those pure metals are non-magnetic. I can't remember. Anyway, just be aware that jewelry can throw off a compass.
iron is one of the worst for sure,
Mm.
and a lot of steels hold a lot of iron in them, especially knives and stuff. There is a jewelry type that is a strong magnet. It's that same stone that I was talking about.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is, but anyway, there is something, and maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But just be aware, jewelry can potentially throw off a compass.
And a compass, by its very nature, is attracted to iron. So if you have a compass and a heavy piece of iron in your possession, it may very well just point to the iron.
Exactly. I can remember, and I'm not going to throw names out because that'd be cruel, but somebody that I used to work with would always be taking their bearing while holding the radio mic basically in the same hand. And he couldn't figure out why they would never get a true read. And it was just like, I know why you're not getting a true read, but some people you just can't explain anything to. Oh, no, 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 that's magnetically shielded. It can't hurt anything. I'm like, magnetically shielded to electronics and magnetic shielded to a compass are kind of two different
Yeah.
things.
Um, we actually have a search and rescue member that tells the story, so I don't mind telling it. And I mean, he's very experienced, very good with the compass. Don't get me wrong; I'm not dissing the man in the least. But he tells a story. There was 8 of them lined up, and they were all told, take a bearing. They wrote in the bearing, and he lined his up, and he turned, and everyone that lined theirs up, and he turned almost 100%, like 90 degrees to him, everyone. And he looked at him, like, "What are you guys all doing?" And they're like, "Well, we're pointing in our direction." He said, "No, you're not. I'm pointing in the right direction." And he stepped aside like 6 feet, and all of a sudden his compass went the same as everyone else's. So he was standing on an iron deposit.
And I was
Uh,
going to say, I've only seen it once, um, personally, and it was up back at Sheet Harbor. And I can't remember where it was. But anyway, yeah, about halfway through our line survey, your compass was no longer accurate because you were walking along some sort of iron deposit.
power lines. If you're walking near or under power lines, they will affect that. Then this, your impromptu compass that you built out of a leaf and a needle, it in a lot of ways is going to be even more sensitive to slight fluctuations than your proper compass. So be aware of that. Like,
Yeah, it'd be my luck I would make this needle right on top of an iron deposit and it would just sit there and spin.
North won't stay still.
What is going on?
So, interesting fact: if you're at the North Pole, what direction is everything else?
It would have to be south.
Everything is south. So if you meet that singularity point, everything else is the exact same direction.
Exactly. But I mean, we did cover. We're coming up on 45 minutes.
Yeah.
We covered a couple different ways to try and find yourself and find a direction, and we gave a lot of information just on navigation in general. So I noticed we only have a couple people talking to us tonight. Well, B&B never wrote back, so I'm assuming that was just a troll. Either that or they had to leave for some reason, and if you did, I apologize for calling you a troll. But I feel like that probably was not related to our topic tonight.
Yeah.
And then we have, and I always say their name wrong, Kier, Keir. I think it's Kier, with us, working in the comment section there, or the chat room, or whatever it is there on the right. But anyway, I have a feeling like more people are going to listen to this on the audio side than anything else. So, our listeners out there, for what it's worth, is there anything that you'd like us to clarify on what we talked about tonight? Because it is a very broad subject that we kind of condensed down into this 45 minutes. And there's a lot of fine nuances to it. And at some point, if we ever get the chance to actually speak face to face again, because of the way everything is going.
Not happening, buddy. This is the new norm.
Having issues with a metal plate implant from an injury. That's the first I heard of that, but I suppose it would work. Kevin Cowan tells a story about teaching a kid to navigate and ended up having issues with a metal plate implanted from an injury.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, I could see it like pinned wrist or something like that. That would totally throw it off. Or a pinned finger.
Especially depending on the era. I mean, a lot of people now have the titanium. That won't have a big effect. But certain things, I'm sure there was times when there was different types. They could very well, using some kind of stainless steel that has an iron content or a magnetic effect, especially prosthetics and stuff, could be all kinds of things in there. So
and now that I get thinking about it, I remember an older feller I used to hang around with had a metal plate in his head, and he could stick a magnet to it. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. This is probably, this chap's dead now, long dead. I was only a kid when he was an old fella. So that, I don't think they use stuff like that anymore, but I guess the potential is out there. Like, you never know. So something else to be aware of. Very good point. Especially, like I said, a pinned wrist or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I think it was a chest or a head implant. And for a younger individual, like a child, that's still plenty close to throw off a compass. Compasses are very delicate. And they're very sensitive to electromagnetic fields and stuff like that, and metals and stuff. That's why standing on an iron deposit, which is for somebody's bend height, 5-6 feet under you, like under the compass, and it's still going to affect it. So a child, if they're holding it straight out, that might only be 1.5 feet. So it's very, well, maybe 2 feet. I don't know. Nah, my arm's only 2 feet, so let's go with the 1.5 feet again. And that's really close.
You could be Jeremy.
Yeah, poor Jeremy. He's not here tonight, so we can just pick on him all. If he's here tonight, he hasn't said anything. So I mean, Jeremy only has arms that are like 6 inches long and legs.
He posted some pictures the other day on a conversation we were having of he's going to kill me of the One Tiger site, because there's a lot of pictures of Jeremy. If you're ever on the One Tiger site, there's a lot of pictures of Jeremy in their tents and stuff and their sleeping bags and all that. He's their favorite model / photographer. And I asked him one time, do you think they like you because of your photography skills or the fact that as a model you make all this gear look super huge?
I'm gonna go with column B for 200, man.
Right?
That tent is so roomy. Huge. Well, when you're only 4 feet tall, of course it's roomy. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy. No, I'm not. It's all in good fun, though, bud.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah,
So
for anybody
since we
that's
get you off,
just listening to this and hasn't listened to any of our other stuff, Jeremy or Lone Wolf 902, just to clarify, he is a friend. We do know him. We're not just picking on this guy because we don't like him. We hope he listens to this stuff and we hope he jabs back at us. It's just part of our bushcrafty clique. What kind of money would you pay for a compass for the average person? And Troy just posed that question there, and it's a good question. Perfect
it's a great
question for
question.
the topic. You know what? It depends what you want to get into. And I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that question because I've seen $10 compasses work just perfectly fine for scooting around in the woods, and I've seen $150 compasses that not only were they overkill, didn't really do what I wanted them to. So,
Um, I would like to push this. Is you're better off if you're only going to have one compass. Get a base plate compass. This is the one with this clear see-through plastic base, and generally some grid lines on it. And you can use this for map and compass navigation a lot better because you can get your bearings and stuff with it. If you just get the round compass
I
with
have
no lines,
props.
what?
I have props.
Oh, it's
So,
fancy.
base plate compasses.
Basically, so I've seen these for like he was indicating 9, $10 is some of the cheapest ones I've seen. You can actually get a relatively decent one for 15, $20, oftentimes a Canadian Tire and stuff. And you can go upwards of $150 for a Sun 2 or a what's the other big brand name? Silva.
Yeah, that's what mine is. I got a Silver Ranger. That's my
Yeah.
go-to.
So I mean, and so that's a base plate compass with the mirror, and the mirror really makes it easier for navigation. And the way you use that is you hold it out at arm's length with the mirror faced at basically a 45, so you can see the compass in the reflection. You sight up there's a set of sights there. Yeah, you hold that string to your chin, tight deal, and you look to see that set of sights like the top of a rifle.
And
You
there's a
line
line on the glass if you can see it there too to give you.
you get all these things lined up. You get a very accurate line, and then you put that like we talked earlier, a tree way down to the distance. You know, hopefully it's the one tree with the top is dead and it's bright red and you can see it for miles. It never is that tree, but if it was, then it's either
And
oh I
like Ben said, this here is probably the most basic compass I have, which is it's just a starter. I think it's still a Silva. Yep, it's still a Silva because I'm big on Silvas, but this is just a Silva starter. And these are only like $7 to $10, and I believe this is the go-to compass for scouts, if I'm
yep.
not mistaken. Well, I think this one is because it still says this was given to me, and it still says First Liverpool Scouts on it. So I'm going to assume it was from the Scouts. And this is a little larger Silva. I can't remember what the name of this one was. But anyway, it's the same thing. All it does is come with a couple geometric shapes on it and a magnifying glass if you're reading a map or something. But the big thing is on all of these, you're going to see some sort, and this is if you're getting into maps, you're going to see some sort of measuring system on there, and that's for using your scale and measuring off distances to get your better bearings and stuff like that. But instead of giving you a price, Troy, what I'm going to give you is what to look for in a compass, if that makes any kind of sense. And you pay what you think is necessary to get these items in a compass. Like Ben said, a clear base plate style compass is the way to go. If you can get one that is turnable so that you can line it up to the direction you want to go and line north up. And I would get a fluid filled one versus just like the old air floater styles. It'll give you a little bit more accurate readings. Lay that down there. And what the fluid does, much like an air pressure gauge, it baffles that needle a little bit, so it'll hover in the correct direction a little better if you're doing like little bits of jiggles and stuff like that moving around. In an air-filled one, the needle tends to bounce and bob and go all around. You don't get quite the most accurate reading. Because regardless of how still people think they are, everybody has a little bit of jitter in their hands when they're holding it out at full length. And the fluid kind of takes that out of that. Now, that's the basics I would look for. Glow in the dark is nice, but it's not necessary because you need something to charge the glow in the dark anyway. So if you have a flashlight, you can still use it. And two, you shouldn't really be navigating at night unless you really know what you're doing. Um, but yeah, being able to turn the base plate so you can point towards north, having a clear base plate to see through for if you're going to work with a map and it's just good to hold in the hand, and fluid filled are the bare necessities I will look for in a compass if you just want something basic for your backpack. And that's, like Ben said, that's going to throw you between, I think, $10 to $20 for a good one. If you want to step up from that, the next thing you can get is some sort of one with a cover on it. It doesn't have to be a Silver Ranger. That just happens to be what I have. But get something with a cover and a sight line on it, like Ben said, and that's just going to allow you to take that bearing. And literally, once you get used to using it, you can use that sight line to pick out your distance a little bit more, and that's just going to get you more accuracy. It's the compass itself, the actual part that spins inside, isn't going to be any less accurate than the $10 jobby over here. It's just it's going to allow you to sight to something in the distance better to keep your bearing accurate over a longer distance.
Gen- Generally, what you're paying for as you go up in price is the additional grid lines, the scales that are on it. So a lot of them will have your different scales, and there's actually usually like a little 90 degrees, like the corner of a square, and you can lay those over the grids and really get your coordinates right down.
And this also comes with a I don't know the technical term of it because I just had the most biggest brain fart ever. But you can use this if you turn it on the side,
Or level.
inside. There's it'll tell you your angle of something
Yeah.
as well, so you can find your rise over run and allow for distancing and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's what some of mine have that too. So all these niceties, that's exactly what they are. They're niceties. I sent you through Facebook just a quick link to one in Canadian Tire. It's $18. It covers the bare basics of what I would expect someone to try and get. Um, and I would choose that one over, say, the other one that you see a lot of is the like a surveyor's compass. I think it's the word, or the engineer's compass.
Oh, it's the classic brass one that flips up with the sights and stuff on it, right?
Yeah, it's fairly good for lining something up, but it's really hard to use with a map because you don't have something that you can line 2 points off of and get your bearings and stuff. So then you need like a ruler, and it takes a little bit more skill to do that. These compasses all in one, if you know how to use them, it's a really good tool. And I've often been in Canadian Tire and Walmart and found nice looking compasses. Now sometimes I do find little things about them, like one of them, my compass pops out every now and then. I got to snap it back in place, but it's never been a problem for me. I've seen them on clearance for very little money, like $4 or $5.
Well, one of these compasses is not as accurate as the others, that's for sure. But I think they're kind of intermingling with each other too. So anyway, what I was going to say was even something like this, which I've taken out and shown Ben before. That's actually not a bad little compass. It is liquid filled. It does come with the sight line on the top of this. I only paid $10 for this whole thing, and it's not only a compass. It's got the magnifying glass, a level,
Steel in there, wasn't it?
a thermometer, a hydrometer. It's got flint and steel in it. It's got a whistle. Like, it's a multi-tool. And for the money I spent, like, this is a wicked little device. But like I said,
Yeah.
one of my compasses is not accurate with the others right at the moment. But it's pretty sure because I got all four of them sitting within a foot of each other. And I'm trying very hard not to stack my compasses on top of each other. Just to try and keep them from demagnetizing each other, which is, it wouldn't happen right away, don't get me wrong, but it's a cumulative effect, if I'm not mistaken.
No. I grabbed a couple. I can't get them to focus on the camera.
But yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I do like that question, though. Like, what should you pick out for a compass? How much should you spend? And it doesn't have to be a fortune, like we said. I've seen some pretty expensive compasses. Generally, in the field, they end up working the same as the cheaper ones.
I was going to say, my $90 or $95 Silver Ranger, I can't remember what I paid for this 15 years ago, is no less or more accurate than the $7 Scout one.
No. And really, your skill is a much more important thing in that case for the average person than the price you spend on your compass. So if you have absolutely no real skill, no knowledge of how to properly use it, you can have a $500 compass. It's going to get you just as lost. And
Yep.
if you have a lot of skill and you have a $5 compass, it's going to get you out of there. So knowing, you know, knowing your area, knowing how to use a map, knowing how to use a compass is much more important than the quality to your cost, in my opinion. Somebody might argue with me, than the cost to your compass. But
Now,
as you get in,
sorry, go ahead.
I said, as you get into it, you may very well want to spend more money for the niceties and the accuracy that you can get with the extra tools and additions to that particular device, and the pride that you take in having that skill and having a quality piece. I mean, we do it with a lot of our gear. People, a $10 backpack can carry just as much stuff as a $100 backpack, but generally. But we like the quality. Same thing with our knives. Same thing with our boots and any pieces of our gear. If we take a lot of pride in it, we're willing to spend a bit more money and a bit more time on it. So keep that in mind, I guess.
And all I was going to say is I do have one major against for when it comes to a compass. You ever see the survival knives with the compass in the hilt? You can get some really bad ones of those. That they don't even point in the same direction twice. So I'm not saying they're all bad. I've seen good ones in these too.
Yeah.
But generally, if you paid $20 for a survival knife that looks like Rambo be carrying it, and it came with a fishing kit and a saw inside, they cheaped on the compass. Like, real bad. But on the other side, I've seen the same knife be worth $200 and have quality equipment inside it. You know what I mean? Like, same design of knife, not same knife, but same design of knife. Have quality equipment in it. So I guess it comes down to just make sure it works.
I had one of them growing up. I don't remember what happened to it. It disappeared at some point in life.
Everybody had one of those growing up, I
But I
think.
can remember you'd be using it for a while, and all of a sudden the blade would get loose, and you could move the tip of the blade like an inch and a half. It would just go, and you'd have to go home with a little socket wrench and get in there, and you could torque it back down to be solid again, and you'd be, oh yeah, I got it good now, and you go use it for a while. Next thing you know, clink, clink, clink.
Yeah, but that just shows the quality of the equipment in whole. So, yeah, hopefully, Troy, that answered the question in a roundabout way. We don't want to give you a dollar figure, but you can get some really good compasses inexpensively. And I guess that's the easiest way to say it. I think that's pretty much it for me. I think we hit all the major points, and we actually had a real good talk on compasses, which on the tail end of this. Is there anything else you could think of you want to throw into this segment, Ben, before we close it up for the night?
Chester hit me. Oh, I wonder if it wasn't a pacemaker. That would really.
Yeah, that could do it too, because that's a little electronic device that sends a shock to your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, constantly, like pulses. So those are very, very good possibility. And I wondered that earlier, actually. So, yeah, no, that's, that covers a lot of stuff. I could honestly talk about this stuff for hours. And, I know we'd end up talking in circles, but I enjoy it. So,
And that's the thing with a lot of the subjects we talk about, and we are trying to rein ourselves in a little bit to some degree, is we are passionate about some of this stuff, and it's interesting when you're into this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's why there's no good answer to the compass question.
the only thing we didn't talk about, and is if you come across a river, follow the river. If you come across a shore, start walking in one direction, and eventually it's going to lead you to something.
Water flows downhill, and most settlements are at the bottom of a water flow.
Things like that. But for the most part, I think one of the things you pointed out early on is the thing to keep in mind is slow down, calm down, take your time, get your bearings, use the shadow trick, and you'll probably realize that you're not in as bad a situation as you thought, and you can get out relatively reasonably. But if you panic, you can really drive yourself into a bigger issue. So, regardless of the situation that left you without proper navigational aids and you felt you're lost, slow down and take your time, and I'm sure you'll figure something out. Try not to panic. And on that note, I guess I'm done.
I'm good too. So thanks for everybody for stopping in. Hopefully we answered your question as good as we could, Troy. And hopefully we see you next week. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.